first question is essentially, what do I think about a 10 by 10? Supersetting that with other exercises and keeping rest about as little between sets as possible. And I would say that there's nothing inherently like special about a 10 by 10. Like, this was like German volume training, I think, is the idea behind this. And I don't think that there's anything special about that. And I think that it makes the most sense to adjust how many weekly sets you're doing per muscle group in response to how well you are progressing. So if you're getting stronger, if you're looking better, if your body measurements are going up, that sort of thing. And adjusting based on how sore you are. If you're sore from session to session, probably not the best thing to do consistently. If your workouts just feel super easy, maybe you try doing a little bit more if you're not progressing, and adjusting based on your training stress rather than thinking there's something inherently special about the 10 by 10 in itself. Now, what do I think about this approach in general? I wouldn't be a huge fan just because, man, 10 sets of a single exercise, I think that I personally would probably end up sandbagging the earlier sets because it's like, damn, I have 10 sets of this entire thing. And that would get really boring and monotonous for me personally. And I really wouldn't love that approach. Now, if you did something like, all right, I have a upper body session and I want to do 10 sets for my chest and back, and I want to superset all those sets and just do one set of chest, one set of back, I think that is a solid approach. But I would probably only do like somewhere between 2 to 5 sets per exercise. It's kind of the sweet spot that I like. So I would at least split that up into 2 separate exercises and probably wouldn't do a 10 by 10 of a single exercise. I mean, could it still work? Yeah, I think it could, but I don't think that would be in line with most people's preferences and what they enjoy and that sort of thing. So I probably wouldn't go that route, and I would use a little bit more exercise variation, and I wouldn't just think that there's anything inherently special about the 10 by 10, and I would adjust based on soreness, progression, and strength, and how well you're responding to that particular training stress per muscle group. And think about things in terms of how you respond to a certain dose of stress rather than, is a 10 by 10 good? If that makes sense. So hopefully that helps you out. Moving on to the next question. How to manage / prevent more like junk volume. So junk volumes, they basically moving weight around when you're tired. Like, you get to the end of a session and the volume that you're doing isn't necessarily producing an additional stimulus for growth, but it is producing fatigue, is what I classify as junk volume. And how do you know when you're doing junk volume? Well, I think that a really good indicator is if you're no longer like getting a very good like mind muscle connection and it just feels like you're kind of moving the weight around. Now, I'm not sure if this like makes sense describing it, but I think if you've gone through it, you might know what I mean, to where it's like something that AJ Morris will mention is that like you don't feel like you're moving the weight anymore, like forcefully moving the weight, and you're just kind of going through the motions. I think that's a really good indicator of junk volume. And I think a good general rule of thumb is that if you're doing much more than like 8 to 10 sets for a muscle group in a single session, I would be pretty skeptical that additional volume you're doing is that quality volume, because I think that there's only so much you can do in a single session. And I think that much above that set number, the volume might get a little bit more junky. So I think that I would do that to prevent junk volume. But like some people that are a little bit more trained and are a bit more used to doing a little bit more sets in a single session, they might be able to get a good quality stimulus out of a little bit more longer workouts and higher set numbers per session. Now, I think another thing to consider with junk volume is the entire session time in general and the entire sets you're doing in a single session in general. Like, I could see a scenario where if you're doing a full lower body day and you're getting to the end of the session, even if you're not above that 8 to 10 sets for your quads, let's say, but if your session is much longer than a couple of hours, I could see how that could turn into the volume just isn't really focused anymore, not super quality, not getting great mind muscle connection, and you're really not driving performance on those exercises anymore. So I could see how that could result in some junk volume as well, but a more trained person could probably do a little bit better with those longer sessions. So there's that side of it too. But I would generally say that to prevent junk volume, maybe not more than 8 to 10 sets for a single muscle in a single workout. Try to be cognizant of, am I just moving the weight around and I'm just kind of tired here? Am I getting a good muscle connection here? Am I still forcefully moving the weight and really focusing on, getting that peak contraction when training a muscle? Am I doing those things? And if you're not doing any of those things, then the volume might be getting a little bit more so junk volume. All right, so hopefully that helps you out there. Next question. Why is it possible to reduce volume on a mini cut while not really advised during a standard cut? Yeah, so I definitely see what you're saying here. So I think that, there's the idea that on a mini cut, you can reduce your volume to kind of resensitize you a little bit to greater training volumes. But during a standard cut, training should remain pretty similar. And I actually think that I would, in both situations, a mini cut and a standard cut, I would probably do a similar thing with my training, and I would adjust my training a little bit compared to when I'm gaining. And I wouldn't necessarily do anything different for a mini cut compared to a standard cut, for me personally. So for my recommendation for mini cut and standard cuts is to keep your volume a little bit more constant throughout your mesocycle. So as you might be aware, I'm a proponent of when I'm going through gaining phases, throughout a mesocycle, I will accumulate my volume throughout a mesocycle from week to week to week. I might add somewhere between 1 to 3 sets per muscle per week across my mesocycle, depending on what muscle groups I'm trying to focus on and certain things like that. And I'll do that for me, my accumulations are usually 3 weeks, then I deload. So I would do that throughout a mesocycle. But during a cutting phase, I keep things in a little bit more of a constant volume range. So, for example, let's say that during a gaining phase, I train from 12 to 20 sets for my biceps. Through a cutting phase, I might only do like 14 to 16 sets. Like a much more tight range, or just stay around 14 or 15 sets the entire time. And the reason why I do this is because during a cutting phase, we probably have a little bit less recovery resources. So it might not make as much sense to really push volumes to those higher levels. Also, it might not be the best idea to drop to that very lowest point either, because while we're cutting, we might be in a little bit more of a catabolic state. So a state that's more conducive to tissue breakdown. So it might not be a bad idea to stay in a more moderate volume range, just to make sure we're still providing that stimulus for that muscle to hang around. So that's kind of how I approach mini cuts and standard cuts. I kind of do the same thing. I stick with a more moderate volume the entire time, rather than starting a little lower and then being a little bit more aggressive with my jumps and ending with, quite higher volumes by the end of my program. So that's kind of how I approach mini cuts and standard cuts. I definitely see how there is a discrepancy between, some people will say you should lower volume during a mini cut to kind of resensitize yourself versus a standard cut. And I think that the rationale behind that is kind of like, well, a mini cut is so short that you can kind of quote unquote get away with that a little bit more compared to if you're in a standard cut. being with perpetual lower volumes while dieting might not be the best idea because the cut is a little bit longer in nature. Is kind of the idea behind that, but I take a more moderate approach to training volume in kind of both scenarios. And I don't really necessarily treat a mini cut as a quote unquote resensitization phase in itself. But I might follow up a mini cut with a double deload or a lower volume phase following it, if that makes sense. So hopefully that helps you out there. Next question. I am just flying through these today. Physiological disadvantages of bulking beyond a certain body fat, and what body fat would you expect to see these disadvantages? Absolutely. So, when looking at some of the disadvantages of going above a certain body fat range, we start to see some disadvantages right around that 25 to 30 BMI range. This can potentially put you at risk of it's called metabolic syndrome. So it's just some potentially negative health complications with getting a bit more overweight. Now, the question is, what body fat percentage usually correlates to these BMI ranges? Because, BMI doesn't always tell the whole picture, especially for the lifting population like you watching this. I would be very surprised if you are not in the lifting population, but I mean, maybe you just see a Q&A from a good-looking guy and you're like, hey, let's check this out. I get it, it's whatever. Okay, sorry about that. So, what body fat tends to correlate with that? And it seems as though about 22 to 30% body fat tends to correlate with that 25 to 30 BMI range, at least what I've read. So, probably going much above that 22, 25% body fat range probably isn't the best idea for just health reasons. Also, there's a similar study that suggests that your waist circumference alone is a good predictor of these negative health complications of being overweight, independent of your BMI. So you could almost just look at your waist circumference alone instead of just the BMI in isolation. Now, it might be a good idea to look at your body fat percentage and a waist circumference just to kind of get a better picture of things, just because body fat percentages might be a little bit difficult to measure and you might not know for sure. So the waist circumference to where you start seeing these negative complications is around 40 inches for guys and about 34 inches for women. So if you're a guy and you're, getting up into those upper 30s for your waist circumference, it's probably not the best idea to continue to bulk and to get up above that 40-inch range, because you might start seeing these, physiological disadvantages for general health reasons. Now, another question that people tend to have is, at what body fat do you start seeing these negative insulin sensitivity complications? Because for a long time, it was proposed that you have to start a gaining phase at 10% body fat, and you have to see your abs before starting a gaining phase, because if you don't, you won't partition nutrients to your muscle and you'll just put on fat. Because the idea is that you start, the leaner you are, the better you partition nutrients. Now, I think that this alone prevents a lot of people from actually gaining significant amounts of muscle. I know it did for myself. In the past, I never thought I was lean enough to go through a gaining phase. And, I distribute all of my body fat to my midsection. So the rule of you have to have abs to bulk doesn't really pan out for me very well, because I've mentioned this before. I've done underwater weighing and bod pod and stuff that should be within an accuracy of 3 to 5% body fat. And I've done this multiple times in school to where I have not had clear definition in my abs. Definitely a blurry 4-pack in good lighting is what I would call it. Yeah, my arms are pretty lean, but I still got my chunky cheeks and my blurred out 4-pack. Blurred out. But in those measurements, I've come out to be like anywhere between 8 and 10% body fat. So even if if the air was, say, 5% off, I would still be around like 13 to 15%, which is still relatively lean. And, I personally don't feel that great until I'm around that was kind of the lower end to where I felt good. So for me personally, I might not feel good until I really go through gaining phases between 15 and 18, 20% body fat, whereas others may feel better when they're staying in those leaner ranges. And I think that the benefits of staying in a body weight range where you feel good, you perform well, you feel like you aren't just like frail under the bar in the gym, and you can actually increase your performance, and you're not food focused throughout the day, and you have more flexibility of your life, and you're sleeping well. All of those benefits, in my opinion, clearly outweigh any potential, because there's not like good research on this anyways, of insulin sensitivity of being leaner. And I wouldn't say that it's like even close. So I think that the best advice that I can have is finding a body weight range. And it can be difficult to find this range to where you feel good, you're performing well, you're progressing in the gym. And this could be training related as well. It could come down to like energy availability, which is a really interesting research topic as well. There's a lot of different things other than just your body fat percentage alone that could play into this. But I think that in general, a lot of people find a kind of low point of their body weight to where they really just don't feel great to go below. Even after maintaining that weight for a while, they just don't feel great. And I think that finding kind of your low point to where you do just generally feel better in the gym, sleeping, all that stuff, not food focused, and then pushing that weight up by 5 to 10%, assessing where you're at, how you're progressing. And then, hey, if you want to mini cut down to that lower end of that range, that's totally fine. But I would make sure to get to that range first and then go through a little bit of a gaining phase to push your body weight up, rather than thinking you have to stay ultra lean all the time. And I know it's tough. I struggled with it for a long time. Now I just accept myself for who I am, and I'm okay with it. Although, I wouldn't complain if I got to a point in the future to where the more muscle you have, the better you look at these higher body fat percentages, and I would be able to have a little leaner or a leaner looking physique. Of course, I'm working towards that, but kind of happy with where I am and all that stuff. And okay, that's enough on that one. Long story short, TLDR. I figured out what TLDR means. Too long, didn't read. Definitely had to look that up though when I saw someone post it out of the grave. But okay, I'm just rambling now. So I wouldn't go much above, if you're gaining that 38 to 40 inch waist mark. I personally don't go much above like 33 or 34 inches, just because that's where I really don't start feeling very comfortable. But then again, some might argue that you have to push beyond that comfort zone, but that's just my thoughts on it and where I'm comfortable cutting it off. And like that 22, 25% body fat is probably where I would cut things off as well, for general health reasons. We're at 20 minutes. The last one, biggest pet peeve in the fitness industry: spending money on questionable supplements when you would get a far better return on your investment by getting a coach that knows what they're doing. And I understand that I'm biased because I'm a coach and I think I'm damn good at what I do, and I know I get results from my clients. Of course, I'm biased, but some people will spend quite a bit of money on fish oil, CBD oil, magnesium, and all these different supplements. And if they added that all up at the end of the month, they could probably afford a freaking good coach that can give them that objective eye, take that training stress off of them, and then help them actually work with them day in, day out to get them where they want to go. And I think you're going to get a far better return on your investment to have that coach there rather than questionably putting some money into supplements. Now, does this mean that that these supplements that I mentioned are bad or that you shouldn't use these supplements? No, that's not what I mean. But I just think it's important to consider where you're putting your money and the cost of these supplements and the return you're getting on your money compared to the opportunity cost of what you could have spend with that money if you were to do something like get a coach. And it doesn't necessarily have to be get a coach. It could be read the RP Diet 2.0 or something like that, reading that book, spending money on that. And I'm not trying to tell you what to do with your money or anything like that. Not at all. But I just think that it is something that is worth considering is, okay, maybe instead of spending money on the stuff that has questionable evidence behind it, would it be better if I put my dollars elsewhere? Like if I have this money that I want to allocate towards getting towards my fitness goals, would it be better spent elsewhere? Would I get a better return on my money rather than on some questionable supplements? That's the only thing that tends to give me some concern is when I'll see, people asking about certain questionable supplements, and it's almost like the last case scenario that they would ever do is consider a coach, when I think that there's, of course, a lot of value in that. But, I am biased because I am a coach. So consider that. And this one's not really fitness industry. I mean, it's kind of nutrition related, but when people either chew or talk with their mouth open, yeah, I could not stand that. My sister, every morning when we were little, she would eat cereal and she would slurp it and then chew with her mouth open, and she would do it on purpose because she knew I hated it. So yeah, that's my second pet peeve. But I hope you enjoyed the questions. Leave your questions down below and I'll answer them in another Q&A, and I'll see you next Sunday.